Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Yeah, so until now what we have done so far is to look into what are the characteristics of new media, so to say, and in order to be able to understand and reflect on the newness of the new media, it is probably worthwhile spending some time on how the new media evolved from, in understanding how the new media evolved from the old media. So, for this session we are going to look at some of the models of communications, and in doing so we will explore how the new media, if we can imagine, like I am leaving this an open ended question, so to say, because like whether it has evolved from new on the old media or not, that is an issue that we have to resolve. So, we are in this session we are going to discuss about some models of communication systems, and to be precise we are going to talk about 3 models, and this 3 models of communication is pertinent to, let me say quote unquote, within like the discourse of the traditional media. So, we are going to look into the communication models pertinent to traditional media, so that we may have an handle of how the old media used to operate, so as to better understand what exactly in the new media takes off from here. So, we will be, as said, we will be discussing 3 models of communication, and 3 models of communications being now, one may ask, why are we doing these 3 models in particular? Like, of course, there are other models. For the interest of time, we do not have the opportunity to look into those, but let me tell you, these are the 3 models propounded by these three theorists. Ferdinand de Saussure, his dates are 1857 to 1903. Roman Jakobson 1896 to 1982, and finally, Stuart Hall 1932. Stuart Hall has recently passed away in 2014. So, we are going to look into 3 communication models propounded by these theoreticians, but in answering why are we going to look into these 3 models in particular. Yeah, of course, there are a bunch of other models that are, for the interest of time, we do not have the opportunity to look into. There is the Shannon-Weaver model, there is the David Berlow's 1960s model of the message channel receiver of communication, and also Wilbur Sharam's model, this Berlun's model, and also there are different approaches that one can take toward understanding these communication systems and communication patterns. One could study communication systems with the help of a constructivist approach, a structuralist approach. There are speech act theories that tries to make sense of communication models. One could go about to studying communication models through cognitive approach, and also there is gateway belief model, which is pertinent for science and technology communication. These are arbitrary and random examples that I have put forth before you, but like of course, for the interest of time, we do not have to look into all the models as such, for which I have chosen the 3 models propounded by the 3 theoreticians, but let me tell you why three of these models in particular. So, in my understanding, I mean there are more models, as I said, would be left undiscussed than we have the time to discuss. We are barely discussing 3 models. In my understanding, these 3 models signify a kind of paradigm shift in our understanding of communication. And these 3 models, if we look into the dates of the 3 theoreticians, Ferdinand de Saussure, Roman Jakobson and Stuart Hall, and the dates and the times when they lived, this signify there has been an evolution. There has been an evolution in the way the theory, their theory sought out to understand communication models. So, in my understanding, these 3 models represent 3 paradigm shifts in the study of communication, and there has been massive radical structural change in which each of the theories seek to understand how communication patterns are organized and how they are structured. So, we will get into these 3 models one by one, starting with Ferdinand de Saussure. So, Ferdinand de Saussure is commonly understood as like the father of modern semiotics. So, semiotics So, semiotics, as realized, is the study, is a discipline, is a branch of knowledge that deals with sign systems and how signs convey the meaning they do. So, semiotics as we understand today as a discipline owes its formulation largely due to the theory that Ferdinand de Saussure had propounded. So, Saussure, in other words, is assumed to be the father of modern semiotics. So, one of the most influential models in understanding communication has been propounded by Saussure, and this model that Saussure propounds explain the phenomena of speech and audition. And if we reflect on this, models of communication or how patterns of organizations are structured largely based on the act of speaking, the act of comprehension and the act of audition. So, we speak, somebody else listen to what we speak and then make responses to it. So, this phenomenon of speech and audition is the premise of the model that Saussure is propounding. So, this Saussure's model explains the phenomena of speech and action as media, or like when I say media here in the context of Ferdinand Saussure, you realize that it is a kind of interface, like it is a medium between one who speaks and one who receives and make response to what has been spoken. So, this was proposed in the early 20th century by Saussure, who happens to be a linguist. So, the basic units of language according to Saussure are signs. So, signs could be both verbal or non-verbal, signs could also be visual or non-visual, as in signs could be graphic and non-graphic, sign could be everything. So, Saussure worked on language as a sign, the linguistic sign, but we have to understand that sign necessarily does not involve language all the time. So, anything, maybe a barcode on a bottle of a chocolate drink we are buying is also a code and therefore, a sign. So, it conveys something, there is information embedded in it. So, sign could be anything and everything, and if we look around us, everything, as we have been reiterating, that everything around us is in a sense mediatized, and everything around us comprises different systems of sign. So, Saussure, in the context of what we are discussing about Saussure and the model that he furnishes, takes up the issue of linguistic sign. According to Saussure, language comprises of different sign systems. So, the basic language is constitutive of signs, and then each sign is comprised of a signifier and a signified. Science. So, according to Saussure, language is constitutive of signs, and each sign can be further classified into what he calls the signifier and the signified. So, we'll look into what he means by signifier and the signified. Yeah, let us spend some time on understanding what Saussure means by the signifier and the signified. So, according to Saussure, the signifier is like a graphic symbolic representation of the sign, whereas the signified is the idea, is the conceptual apparatus that the signifier refers to. In other words, the signifier is the graphic representation of a certain idea, whereas signified is the idea and the concept as we tend to visualize it. Imagine the word tree, which comprises 4 English alphabets T, R and 2 E's. Combining these 4 letters in a particular way in the order as it is organized, say for example, T first, R second, E third and the second E as fourth. So, this particular order renders, this particular arrangement renders possible the imagination of the idea of tree as it occurs in our mind. The moment we read tree, the moment we say tree, the moment we write tree, there is this image of tree that pops up in our mind. So, imagine for example, the word dog here. So, it is a particular pattern of arrangement of 3 letters of the English alphabet D, O, G. So, we arrange it in a certain orders and it gives us the imagination, it gives us the idea of, it helps us imagine the idea of the 4-footed animal which is the dog. So, this is the relation between the signifier and the signified. So, this is one is the graphic representation, the particular way the letters, the signs are arranged, and signified is the idea that it gives rise to. In his breakthrough formulation, Saussure happens to propose one very important fundamentally new idea. He says, Saussure says that the relation between the signifier and the signified is arbitrary. In Saussure's own words, of course, he did not write in English, and for as an anecdotal information, I must say here that Saussure's book, from where I am reiterating this, is called the Course in General Linguistics. So, this is a course he actually taught in his class, and he never wrote the book himself. There were his class notes being taken by his students, who later compiled them as a book, which later came out as the Course in General Linguistics. So, of course, Saussure did not write himself, but what we get to here today in Saussure's own words, and of course, in translation, Saussure says like this unmotivated, and which has later been translated as arbitrary. Saussure says the relation between signifier and the signified is arbitrary. In other words, what Saussure suggests is there is no intrinsic relation between the signifier and the signified. So, now look into the example that I have just cited, the example of the dog. So, when the three letters D, O, G, as I said, arranged in a particular pattern, particular order of progression, D first, O second, G third, gives us the impression of dog. Now, if we reverse the order starting with number 3, number 2 and number 1, if we just reverse the order of the alphabets, that becomes God, which has a totally different connotation altogether. This particular pattern in the arrangement of the three alphabets D, O, G, which is the signifier, the D, O, G is the signifier, which if and when reversed gives us a totally different referent. Referent is again like the signified, like what has been signified is called referent. This means that the same symbolic signs D, O, G, these are symbolic signs. Alphabets according to Saussure are signs, because these are language. If we recall, language is constituted of signs and alphabets are signs nevertheless. So, this means that the same symbolic signs can invoke different meanings and even contradictory meanings, like as I gave you the example dog, if reversed, if the order is reversed, it becomes God. It could refer to totally contradictory meanings, number 1, or the same reference could have different signifiers in different sign systems. Say for example, dog is spelt DOG only in the English or Roman alphabetical sign system, but if we want to invoke the imagery of the dog, the concept of the dog, instead of DOG, as is the case of the English or Roman alphabetical system, in French this would be chien. Change the linguistic sign system from English to French, for example, dog becomes chien. The signifier in the French linguistic sign system is chien. But having said that, chien, again this Roman alphabets ordered in the way that it is CHIEN invokes the same imagery as DOG does. So, you understand, like there is no intrinsic relation between the idea of dogness, so to say, the imagination of the dog, with the particular way in which the three alphabets DOG is arranged, or in a particular way that CHIEN is arranged in the French linguistic system. And likewise, the image of the tree has got no intrinsic connection to how tree is spelt in any language whatsoever. So, this is what Ferdinand de Saussure means when he says that the relation between the signifier and the signified is arbitrary. So, nonetheless, the symbolic sign works and we are able to decipher the signs correctly, for there is a consensus among us regarding the meanings of what the signifier actually signifies, because when we write DOG, there is usually a consensus among us. We agree to believe in the fact that DOG is invoking, capturing the idea of dogness, is rendering possible for us to imagine the particular image of the dog. If we step aside of the linguistic sign system for a while, imagine the traffic signal, which is also a sign. Speaking of the consensus, like for example, all of us we stop at the red light because there is a consensus and we all agree that the red light as a sign is conveying a particular semiotic code to us, which prompts us to stop. Like sign systems in general, linguistic or otherwise, operate on this basic premise that there has to be a consensus, like there has to be consensus among its users, its receivers, at the level, at the realm of its intended meaning. Reconsider the example of the traffic signals. I will give you like a very popular joke. Anecdotally, when I was traveling in Bangladesh, I heard this joke which is very popular in Dhaka in particular. Like Dhaka is notorious for its traffic jam, and Dhaka has like probably the highest number of rickshaws, and which is often determined to be the cause of the notorious traffic jam that Dhaka faces. So, there is a popular joke in Dhaka that says that once a rickshaw puller was stuck in a traffic jam. He stopped, the rickshaw puller stops in the red light, but the green light, instead of a circular green thing, the light signaled as like an arrow pointing upwards, like in the traffic signal was somewhat like so the rickshaw puller could not make sense of this, and of course, we now understand, when anyone literate in the driving culture would understand this is a go ahead sign, like after the red sign a green sign of this sort, we believe that there is a consensus that the sign is conveying us to go straight ahead, but like the joke as it goes says the rickshaw puller understood it as a sign that saying that you have to go upwards, like, and he could not make sense of what to do, and the traffic was stuck because he didn't go ahead, because he could not make sense of what this signal conveys. Although he stopped at the red signal, like this he could not make sense of, and he understood this as signaling to go up. So, he could not go up with his rickshaw. So, he was stuck. So, what this joke, like although I brought it up teasingly, this joke illustrates the point, illustrates the significance of the need for a consensus in order for sign systems to work. Like for example, the case with the rickshaw puller, there was not a consensus, and which is why there was a traffic jam, people were stuck in traffic. So, premise upon which linguistic or otherwise sign systems work is based on the assumption that there has to be a consensus. So, this is to say a sign invokes an intended meaning only when operating within a paradigm of shared cultural linguistic assumptions. In a way, what we glean from Exsocious model is the fact that sign systems, certain signs work only when they operate within a paradigm of a shared cultural linguistic assumptions. For example, the rickshaw puller in Dhaka was not operating within a consensus, was not operating within the shared system of codifications and shared system of semiology, which is why the system, the sign did not work. So, which idea being that these shared cultural assumptions are universalizable. So, when I see a green light, I know it is a go ahead sign. So, it is an universalizable, it is an universal shared semiotic code that is universalizable. We agree on the meaning of the code that it tries to convey. In other words, it is universalizable in the sense that those who take part in the system of communication, or more precisely in the exchange of this particular sign, unanimously agree on both what the signified means and how it should be interpreted. The green light, the red light in the traffic is a sign system, and what it signifies, as in the signified. Let us get back to the model here. The red traffic light is the signifier, and what it signifies is the message that we have to stop. So, there is a consensus that we have to stop. So, this message that is trying to convey, this whole idea, this whole conveyance of the red light directing us to stop is the signified. As I said, like people and participants who exchange in this kind of a shared semiotic pattern, they engage unanimously on what the sign means, what it intends to convey, and how it should be interpreted. This in sum is the prerequisite, according to Ferdinand de Saussure. This is the prerequisite for any linguistic communication to happen. The reason that we are discussing these three models in particular is, besides the fact that they are very important, and though they are in a sense kind of paradigm shifts in how we think about communication systems, but the main reason we are focusing on these three models is the fact that they best illustrate the way how the new media has in one sense evolved out of the traditional media. Like one of the particular characteristic that we have been ascribing to new media, its blurring of the line between the producer and consumer of the media. So, this is one particular characteristic that we have been ascribing to media. So, these three models in particular, we are as I said that we are leaving out more models of communication undiscussed than we have the time to discuss here. In essence, what these three models do is that it best exemplifies the way how this blurring of the line occurs, in particular with the help of the emergence of the new media, the blurring of the line between the producer and the consumer. So, when we discuss these three models, and as the dates of the particular three theorists Ferdinand de Saussure, Roman Jakobson and the Stuart all suggests that their dates are spanned across centuries, and there is a very huge temporal lapse in between the times they lived in. So, we have particularly chosen these three thinkers and the three models for a reason. There is a reason to this. The reason being the way how each of this model breaks away from the former suggests the how newer forms of media technology communications actually break away, blur the line between the producer and consumer of the image. Once we go through the three models, it would help better understand how this blurring in particular has occurred.